Are you the kind of person who would sort things out before doing it, but you still rush to finish them at the end? Or will you be very inspired after watching a video in which people studied crazily and you feel you're so motivated? However, it lasted for 3 days. Those are the questions people would ask me when I talk about the word grit. And I wasn't talking about anybody else. I wasn't talking about myself. Recently I read a book which is called Grit, The Power of Passion and Perseverance. And in this book, it's basically talking about the emergence and development and the civilization of the word grit. There's an experiment that stood out has interested me, which is called the grit, and as I showed on the picture. During this process of this experiment, people are asked to record down the things that they did spend the most time in, things like sports or academic studies, and fill it into the grid and calculate the scores. Points are accumulated by like the time it took you or the achievement you accomplished. The experimenter predicted that there's an inevitable correlation between the rate that people finish their university and the rate and the scores they are getting on the grid. Over 37% of people who got full marks successfully finished their university and got their diploma, while only 16 of them who got 0 marks. Then it comes to my story. When I was little, I had really few chance of contracting with the Western cultures. However, I always have a strong interest towards it. As I grew older, the textbook in my primary school became the only key for me to explore the unknown territory and which opens the door of this exotic language and culture. After the primary school, I went to the junior high. I was very honored to receive the news that I would go to an international school. However, with the excitement and happiness, I was concerned about the unfamiliar language and how did I deal with that. I still remember those bitterness and tiredness after thousands of memorizing the words. During the summer holiday, I entered a cram school and I was being told to do endless English homework and to read interminable English literature and to do and what really got me a headache, it was the infinite English words memorization. So, to prepare for the spot quiz next day, I had to recite those words until midnight. So at first, I cried, I yelled. I refused to do those. And what happened was getting an A on the next day. After 3 days, I learned nothing and wasted the time. It occurred to me that instead of wasting time, why don't I just have a try and see how that changes? And I did, which is to learn the method, the tricks of memorizing words. And the best one worked for me was to memorize words as I wrote them. And I did. It worked very well, and on the next few days about this pop quiz, the mastery of my words was significantly higher than the previous days. Significantly higher than the previous days. So, as just I was feeling smug about it, it came another problem. That I could only know the words, but I don't know the meaning. When I heard the word, I don't know the meaning, but I see it, I know the meaning. How do I solve this problem? I did something different. Can you give me applause? Thank you. So, I did something slightly different. As I memorized those words, during the class, during the English class, there was something bad happening. It was that because I couldn't hear the word properly, so there was a misinterpretation during the class, which is the teacher was telling about a story about the pea cultivations, and I misheard it to pea, which is urine. So I laughed, like thunderously. Nobody laughed on that class. It was complete silence. And I was the one who laughing. The teacher was like, "Are you okay?" And the students all look at me with doubts on their faces. However, I shut my mouth and just sat there for the rest of the class because it was so embarrassing. To pronounce a word requires dozens of practices. And a word cannot represent a meaning. A formation of a complete sentence requires not only the knowledge of the word itself, but you also need to know how to match the words and the meaning of them flexibly and correctly. And that poses another problem of mine. The sentences I made were always incorrect. So I did something. So I wanted to say there's a handicapped restroom next to you. I would probably say there's a deformed man toilet. But deformed man is like that. It's confusing, and that's where the problem was. So I decided to watch more English people do their talkings and note down how are their sentences different from mine. And after a long time of seeing difference, my sentence did improve. At least no more the deformed man toilet. And after that, I entered the international school. And the school life was pretty tense. That the first thing the teacher asked during the first day was, "Can you introduce yourself?" Well, I can't. The sentence sounds so simple, and it virtually negates the thousands of words I've memorized during those midnights. Because I can't answer her, I don't know how to. The question is, I was wondering, can I learn English well, and how do I learn English well? The teacher seems to spot my problem, and she encouraged me to speak more, even though I wasn't a great speaker. I don't know if it's the encouragement from the teacher, or I don't know if it's the encouragement from the teacher, or my own determination wanting to learn English well, or the thousands of times I standing in front of a mirror and practices. Eventually, I did. I got rid of the problem that I couldn't speak. However, is that the end? No. So I discovered something. Even though the language itself is a tool for communicating, but it doesn't mean that you're skilled in language, you can call yourself a foreigner. So I spotted something bigger. So it was even though I conquered the communication barrier, the facts proved that I wasn't part of the group, and here's what I mean. There were several times I tell my classmates a joke and they seem to be confusing. And they tell me jokes, I was as lost as I did. It was a problem that we might be saying the same thing, but what they're trying to express were totally different from mine. Because we have the different mindsets. Like the saying in China, Like the ghost can make, money can make the ghost milestone. It basically means that money can do everything. But the Western people might say, why? Why can't you hire a human instead of the ghost? So I did something to remove the barrier. Well, quite a lot of things. So I start off with watching a TV series because I don't see foreign people all the time and I want to know their lives. And this TV series is called The Modern Family. In this TV series, I see something I've never seen before, which is the diversity of life. Jane is a middle-aged man, married Gloria, who is a recent immigrant from Colombia. And Jane's daughter Claire married Phil, who has 3 children, lived in a middle-class family. And Jane's son, with his husband Caramel, she had a gay family and they adopted a Vietnamese daughter. There are conflicts, in this composition of family, there are conflicts between the tradition and pluralism. Even though there are some fights and conflicts, it's communication which makes them solve the problem. People always say that family is a minor unit of the society. What's happening inside of family is what's happening inside of the society. So a TV series is not enough for me to get an idea about what the mindsets are. So I decided to do something even bigger, research on something even bigger, which is the MUN, Model United Nations. Even though I wasn't participated in one of those, however, I did something very similar, simply just to read more news. And I'm gonna ask you guys some questions. Do any of you guys have you ever heard the 17 Sustainable Development Goals? Yes. Okay, thank you. And can any of you guys name them? Well, okay. Well, I can't either, because it's pretty long. So, but I do know some of them pretty well, especially the first one, no poverty. And I joined one project like that. Last year in November, I joined a project which is dedicating on aiming the local village was not just providing them the financial supports, but as well as introducing their goods to a wider variety, to a wider community. These things are not something you can just do by sitting in front of the computer and write. We actually went there and experienced their lives. The lives there was really tough. That in the summer, there's no air conditioning or refrigerators that we could only use a wooden fan for the cooling. And in the winter, there's no water heater or any hot water machines. So we were living in a one sheet thick tent, and in the midnights, there was wind howling and blowing and hitting on our face. The next morning, our face was totally red, and most of us looks like we've been slapped on our faces. And those are not the worst of it. Because this village is really far from the cities, that the water supply does not come to it. Not all of the residents have the water supply for showering, and some of them had it, and it looks like this. I know I was being very dramatic, but however, it is very close related. Even though those are... Anyway, I wanted to say that none of us has quitted halfway. After seeing how many poor children lived there with muds and wounds on their faces, and we have the chance of rescuing them, why should we abandon them? So, even though the lives are tough, but we still keeps on going. Keeps on, and we still keeps on going. And what made me did those is the spirit of grit. I insisted on them. The language as the language English I learned is now no longer something just for communicating. It is a tool that connects people like me, who identify myself as a world citizen, and to be aware and responsible for a wider community. So in the last, I want to say that, in fact, no matter who you are, when you're dealing with suffering and frustrations, you will always encounter your spiritual crisis. The real hero is not whom never encountered crisis. It is whom can bite the bullet and keeps on going. So, that's the end of my speech. Thank you.